Alright, what's up guys? Today I'm going to do a weapon guide for fighter. This is going to cover, I'm pretty sure, every single possible melee weapon. Not every possible melee weapon, because you know you can use every weapon with Weapon Master. But other than that, it's going to cover every potentially usable weapon that are including some that you have to use Weapon Master for, and then I'm going to include all of the ones that fighter can use naturally, even if they're awful. I'm not including ranged weapons in this because I don't. I mean, I'll go over them a bit if I remember at the end, but for the most part, you don't need me to include ranged weapons so you can see me shooting an arrow, right? Like I'm including on the melee weapons. I'm going to show off all their move sets. I'm going to talk about them a little bit, and yeah. So to start off with, we have the arming sword. You know, just normal arming sword. You know, just it has the diagonals and then thrust. It's definitely the best weapon for fighter right now in the meta. The very fast swings combined with the very fast recovery, which allows you to block faster, is just amazing. The Falchion was really good. Falchion's been nerfed many times, so it's not as viable anymore. And you can see here that I'm showing off it does have its weak points, mainly that it's really bad in like certain tight spaces because you have very like tall swings, so it's very easy to hit like the things above you. Like you see, I'm trying to walk through it. I'm hitting this. So, for example, if you were hiding in this crouch, you'd have to look pretty much vertically down to swing. And this is one of the weak points of the arming sword. The other one being the third swing is it's not bad. It's very weird to get used to because it is a thrust. You have to be very accurate with it. If you're not careful, you'll go right over people's shoulders. All right, and the next weapon is the falchion. You know, see, just normal horizontal swings from the right, from the left, and you have your overhead. This weapon, its best upside is it has pretty high base damage. It's been nerfed a lot, but the base damage is still pretty high. So this weapon is much more likely to kill people in 2 hits rather than 3 or 4 like the arming sword is. The big downside of this weapon, though, as you can see here, is it's very hard to swing in these tight areas. Honestly, it should be hitting that right wall there. I'm pretty sure that's just like some, yeah, you see like my sword's going in the wall. That's just some sort of like visual bug. But the downside to this is very slow. You have a long recovery time, and you're much more likely to hit walls. And then onto the longsword, should be our first two-handed weapon. A lot of people really love this weapon. I personally think it's very fun. However, the swing set of the weapon just by default isn't very good. You see you have that thrust into the slap, into the slice. Definitely not that good. And you're going to see me sit here and fail to parry this zombie a few times because this is the selling point of the weapon. It's you hit that parry, and then you have that riposte attack there. Obviously, I missed it, so, you know, it's not as good. Missed it again. As you can tell, I don't use the longsword very often. But this weapon is pretty strong in 1v1s. It's not as good in team settings because there's much more people that you have to try to worry about. In 1v1s, it's much easier to parry bait people. You see, you do have that thrust, which is very easy to get into certain spots. To that slap and the slice. The slap and the slice aren't very good. It's very easy for them to hit walls. And the slap range is negative. Slap range is basically just the parry. Their riposte animation just has significantly less damage. You see there's that slap again. And if you do hit it, you do get that follow-up where you get to swing it again. And yeah, that's the longsword. Pretty good, is what it is. Now onto the battle axe. I'm going to be honest with you, there's not much to talk about this weapon. This weapon's horrible. You should never use it. Barbarians don't even use this. It's their default weapon. This weapon is absolutely atrocious. Please never use it. It's so slow. The alt attack isn't good either. The damage is low. It's just do not ever use this weapon. Don't ever use it. I'm begging. Like, just look at this thing, man. This is depressing. It's like, I mean, you do have overheads that don't actually hit the wall that often, and something cool that you can do here. You see I'm hitting the wall but if you drag it, you can go to where you won't hit it. Which is a pretty cool thing. If you drag it through there, you can get around a wall that you would normally hit. See, I'm doing it there, or I do it like that. I would hit the wall so if I drag it, I can get it around the wall. And right here, I'm not quite dragging it enough. See, like you can do it like that, and you actually will hit in front of you, which is a pretty cool thing. You actually do it with a lot of weapons. That's just a battle axe is one of them. All right, onto the Castellan. This dagger isn't good on its own. However, if you play Slayer Fighter, the Castellan is probably your best secondary. Either that or a very high rarity lantern because you know it lowers the move speed. See here, I'm doing that dragging tech again. This time on a much shorter weapon. Also, I mean, it's kind of difficult because I am hitting that right wall. But it's if you're really good at it and you're used to it, it's something. It's definitely easy and it's definitely really nice because you can hit people in doorways when you normally wouldn't be able to. Okay, onto the Horseman's Axe. This weapon just got a pretty big nerf. So as you can see, I'm swinging it very, very slowly. So it's really not that good. It's just one of the native fighter weapons, so I thought I'd give it a chance. Because the best part about fighter is the fact that they can use so many things. Like let's say, for example, let's say I'm playing the game, right? And I loot my first chest and I've had a purple Horseman's Axe, right? Even if the Horseman's Axe isn't that good, it's gonna be better than your gray arming sword. So it's always good to be able to pick up any weapon and use them. You see here, I'm just showing off the ability to swing in doorways and stuff with it because fighting in doorways is a big part of fighter because a lot of times you will be blocking doorways with your shield and stuff. And that is the Horseman's Axe. Okay, now on the Crystal Sword. This weapon isn't good unless you're fighting another fighter, is what I'll say. If you are fighting specifically another fighter and you're being buffed, this weapon actually has pretty good use because you'll do pretty good damage to them. You see, it's very hard to swing in a doorway with it. You're hitting walls most of the time. If you're going to do it, most of the time you're going to be using this thrust here. And then on to the next weapon, the Halberd. This is one of my personal favorite weapons. I love using it so much. As you see, I'm hitting that wall even though it's very high. You have very high attacks, so you do have to be very careful about where you're using this. You have the alternate attack, which are these big, wide sweeps. These aren't that good in PvP. The best thing they're used for is either clearing adds from very far away, like skeleton champs, or sweeping rooms for invisible targets, like rogues or wizards. And you see here what you can do is you can drag it down so you don't hit the wall. Or you can just crouch like this. But, I mean, I hit the torch there, which is different. I didn't actually hit the wall. You see, yep, and just showing off that sweep again. It's right here. I'm trying to show off the range of how you see how far it is. You see that second attack actually goes very, very far. Like you can see, I'm a good distance away, and I'm still hitting this door. I think right here is where I don't. Yeah. Just the Halberd has very, very strong range. Then onto the next weapon, we have the spear. Something to note about this weapon as you're watching me use the moveset. So every weapon has a sour spot and a sweet spot. Well, mostly every weapon. And what it means is, depending on the part of the weapon you hit them with, you will either do full damage or reduced damage. So, for example, like a bladed weapon, like a sword, if you hit them with like the end of the sword, you're doing full damage. However, you hit them with like the hilt or like the lower part of the sword, you're not going to do full damage. The spear takes this a step further, and the spear is based on range. So if you're too close to an enemy, like you see how I'm spacing this guy, if you're too close to him, then you won't be able to do full damage. And obviously you can block things like arrows with the spear, which is pretty cool. But yeah, if you're too close to enemy with the spear, you only do about 70% damage, so the spear is very, very bad. Now we have this Zweihander. This weapon was buffed not too long ago. It got a smaller movement speed penalty. This weapon's honestly not that bad. This weapon is pretty much just a longer Falchion. The only downside is obviously because it's longer, it's much easier to hit walls. You have that alternate attack. Honestly, this alternate attack is not good. I would not recommend using it. Here, I'm just trying to show off the range of it. You see, like, I'm hitting that torch all the way up there. So it's got a very, very long range. Not quite as long as the Halberd, I don't think, but it's still very, very long. Like I said, that alternate attack, it's not very good. It's got a really long wind up, and you're just going to do less. Now onto the hatchet. I see the hatchet's pretty much just a horseman's axe in your other hand. I'm not going to lie, that's literally all it is. It's got really nothing special going for it. It's got very short range. It's got lower damage than the Horseman's. It swings at about the same speed. Pretty much there's no reason to ever use this weapon over a Horseman's. Unless you have just a really good one. Compared to like anything else. Now the Viking sword. This weapon actually did get some pretty big buffs recently. They gave it a pretty big damage increase. And they gave it a... They made it much faster when it's swinging. As you can tell, I'm swinging significantly faster than before. This weapon is kind of like a combination between a Falchion and an arming sword. It kind of has the arming sword moveset of those overhead slash diagonals, and it has like kind of Falchion level damage. This weapon honestly probably has some sort of viability. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't tried it much, but it certainly could be usable. Alright, you see here the flying mace. which is one of the last weapons we'll be showing. This is the cleric weapon, but you can use it. It doesn't have a bad moveset. The downside to maces is, like I was talking about sour spots, is it's their sweet spot and sour spot. It's all on that tip there. It's all on that big clubbed head. So if you're not hitting with that part, you're doing much less damage. You see the short sword. This is another option for Slayer build because it has that has a very low move speed penalty of only like 10, I think. I don't know what that transition was. Ignore that. But it has very low movement speed penalty. So it is definitely usable, and actually doesn't have a bad moveset either. So it is certainly possible to use. Okay, that pretty much sums it up for the movesets of all of these. I want to kind of go back through and just like talk about. So first of all, we have Arming Sword. Like I said, Arming Sword is the best weapon for fighter. It's definitely the most meta weapon. Going Arming Sword with shield, specifically Heater Shield, is probably your best bet. You see my perks here. These perks are you're always going to go. You have Swift, Defense Mastery, Shield Mastery, and Projectile Resistance. These are like your best perks. Then, let's see what's next. We have, I think the Falchion is next. Or no. Yeah, Falchion's next. Back up. You see me. There we go. You see the Falchion is next. This weapon, it's pretty much just a worse version of the Arming Sword. You're not, if you have the choice between two that are equally as good, you're always going to take Arming Sword. Like, the Falchion just, it's much weaker now, and it's really easy to hit arms with it, so the weapon isn't as good. It kind of sucks that that's how it works, but it just is. You are very unlikely to hit body shots. Almost any time you would hit a body shot, it's going to end up being an arm. Especially if you're playing against someone that knows what they're doing. It's very easy to make sure they hit your arm, either by jumping or turning their body or whatever they have to do. Then we have the Longsword. The Longsword, it's just, I mean, it's just not good. When I speak of this, by the way, this is specifically for trios. I don't speak of solos because I don't play solos, and I don't think the game's not balanced around solos. And honestly, I don't really care that much about solos. I only really care about trios. So for solos, take this as my opinion only for trios. I would not, like I said, I don't know about solos. But for trios, Longsword is not a good weapon. The moveset is really bad. This weapon is 100% reliant on parrying. And if you are not able to parry and get those ripostes off, then it's just not good. You're not doing the damage, and your weapon is just basically a bad version of a spear and a halberd. That's what this weapon is. That it's parry. It is a spear mixed with a halberd. You just have you have like the spear thrust, and you have like the halberd like slash attacks. However, if you are able to parry, let's say you're able to parry every single attack, this weapon is slightly better. However, one really big counter to the longsword is, let's say for example, somebody's walking at you with a halberd, and you're trying to parry them, right? Like, they know you're trying to parry them. All they have to do is just walk past you, start going to pressure your backline, and you have two choices. And, like, assuming you're not like in a spot where you can body block them. Like, if you're in a doorway, you can't get your riposte off anyway, so that's not good for you. But you have two choices. One is to try to like go to their backline to try to kill them while they're going to yours and hope your backline can deal with them. But keep in mind, your weapon is much weaker than a halberd, and your moveset is not good. Two is to start swinging at them to prevent them doing that. What's going to happen is, if you decide to swing at them, which most people will do, they can then trade with you without fear of being parried. So then you're just using a very low damage weapon, because the big mechanic of your weapon has been removed by them. Alright. Okay, and what's next? The battle axe. This weapon sucks. We're not going to go over it. It's a waste of time. The Castellan is not the worst weapon ever. Like I said, it's pretty good in Slayer builds. It has really good mix-ups. I'm gonna put up a Slayer fighter video tomorrow, I believe, so you'll be able to see then I was using Castellan and Arming Sword. It actually does give you pretty good mix-ups with the Arming Sword. It makes certain attacks come out much faster than you'd expect. And yeah, I mean, other than that, you're not gonna use the weapon on its own. So it's kind of like a support weapon. You get a good one with good stats to benefit your Slayer build. Then we have the Horseman's Axe. This weapon is not very good anymore. I don't recommend using it. It was pretty much only ever a barb weapon, even when we had access to it, because this weapon is basically just going to be worse than Arming Sword, lower damage, slower, etc., etc. That's the case for... So Crystal Sword. I've been asked about Crystal Sword Fighter so much. And let me just say, this weapon, 99% of the time, it's not good. Could you build the gear cheap? Yes. Are people going to expect it? No. Is it going to do anything? Probably not. The only time this is ever going to be usable is, one, if you are fighting fighters or clerics, but clerics have a lot of magic res, so it doesn't matter. So almost only when you're fighting fighters is this good. And two, you have to have a wizard buffing you with ignite, or your damage is gonna be really low. You have to get additional magic damage plate gear, and you have to have a wizard buffing you with ignite, so your damage is high. If you meet all these requirements, you can like 2 to 3 shot other fighters with really really good magic damage gear. I mean, part of the problem is that gear just doesn't exist because no one's keeping it to sell it. But in theory, this could work in a meta where fighters are super OP and super common. The big downside to Crystal Sword is it is a two-handed weapon, so you don't get to use a shield and you have a bigger movement speed penalty. If you could use a shield with Crystal Sword, honestly, it would probably be a really good weapon. But you can't, so it's kind of just a fucking meme. Alright, on to the next one, which is Halberd. It's just... So, Halberd, I think, is probably either the second or third best fighter weapon. The downside to Halberd really lies in the fact that, like I said, it's a two-handed weapon. You have a really big movement speed penalty when you have it out, and you have no shield. Having no shield is really bad because shield gives you so many. Shield is giving you like a purple or blue heater shield is going to give you around 40 armor. Like it's like 36 to 40 armor is like your average. You're probably going to get somewhere around there. And not to mention extra stat rolls you can get on it. So you can get extra armor rating, extra like all attributes, strength, agi. You can get any extra stat rolls on that, which is beneficial. Whereas if you're using a two-handed weapon, you only have one set of stat rolls versus the two from a one-handed like sword and a shield. And all that extra armor rating is not, you're not getting it. So you're gonna have much less PDR for physical damage reduction. You have much less physical damage reduction. That it's really hard to make up. However, with that being said, if you are able to make up that deficit from not having a shield, and you can get like 73, 75% damage reduction, and you're running with a bard, because yes, you do need a bard, I promise. You have to have a bard to play two-handed. I firmly believe that. But if you meet all those requirements, Halberd is pretty damn good. It has very, very high damage. It's very good against barbarians especially, too. You can pretty much 1 to 2 tap any character in the game with a Halberd. 3, and that's not another really high defense fighter. 3 tap at the most on everybody else. Barbs are really only going to live 2. A really, really geared cleric might live 2 to 3 as well, but no one's living more than 3 if you're getting headshots. That's just not happening. Halberd is very, very strong. When you have, like, with a good Halberd and a good gear set, your third swing on a dummy can be hitting for upwards of, like, 170. Very, very strong weapon. Alright, on to the next one, which I believe is Spear. So, like I said, I talked about the sweet and sour spots with Spear. That alone just makes this weapon not good, I think. Also, just purely thrust weapons. They're, like, very whatever. I don't like them. I've never really liked the Spear. I've always thought this weapon felt bad, and I mean, that was even before I knew about the sour spots, but just, the thing is with this weapon, the weapon has low base damage, and on top of that, in almost every single fight, you're going to be hitting for only 70% of your total damage anyways, so just not very good. Wouldn't recommend it. And I believe, do we have any other useful weapons on here that I can actually talk about? Zwei, if you fight in open spaces, this is a pretty good weapon. If you're not fighting in open spaces, it's basically useless. You can't even swing it. Hatchet, awful. Viking Sword actually has some viability, I think. I have not tried it, but I do believe the Viking Sword actually has some viability, and I will test this further, I promise. And then I think the Flaying Mace is the last one I'll talk about. Or Short Sword. Where's the mace at? Did I miss the mace? Oh well, not my problem. Alright, so the Short Sword's the last one I'll talk about. It basically has the same thing going for it that the Castellan does. It's good offhand for Slayer. On its own, it's not a very good weapon. It's kind of just like a supplementary weapon. You can use it to swing if you have a very good one, because the moveset does actually come out pretty fast, and you can put out a good amount of damage. Your range isn't that awful either. So it's actually a semi-usable weapon, I think. It's definitely not as good as some, but not as bad as others. But okay, with that being said, that pretty much covers my entire weapon fighter guide. I don't really think there's anything I missed. Like I said, okay, actually, oh yeah, I forgot. I got to talk about crossbow and longbow. So your 2 viable ranged options really are going to be longbow and crossbow. Crossbow specifically is much, much better. One reason being it doesn't require weapon mastery to use, so there is no penalty for using it, and you get that extra free perk slot. The best part about crossbow that longbow doesn't have is Longbow has to be drawn back and fired. Crossbow can be already preloaded. You pop it out, take one shot, put it up, you're good to go. Longbows, you pull it out, you have to draw it back, fire. Does longbow has faster rate of fire, but overall, if they see that you're pulling your bow back, it's much harder to actually hit them. Crossbow is like significantly harder to react to, and you just pull it out and take one shot very fast. Not to mention, crossbow has a higher base damage by like a good amount. Like a purple crossbow to a purple longbow is around a 10 damage difference or something, a 10 weapon damage difference, which actually is a pretty big deal. It's really difference between one-shotting to two-shotting. Like crossbow, even without a headshot with good gear, can one-shot wizards, for example, with body shots because they have with no +3 all gear because they have very low base HP. They only have around 80, I believe. So it's very easy to actually hit that body shot, one-shot threshold with a crossbow, whereas a longbow is never going to do that. You are never going to have that much damage on fighter to ever do that. However, with the headshot, it is realistic. You could actually one-shot them with a headshot with longbow if your gear is really good. But it's like I said, because you do have a damage penalty. Like it's already lower damage, and there's a 10% damage penalty from having to use Weapon Mastery to use it. So generally speaking, I think the crossbow is just always better. I think the ideal loadout right now for a fighter is arming sword, heater shield, crossbow. I don't think there's much that's gonna change between that unless arming sword or something gets nerfed. Even with crossbow nerfs, it's still very strong. You basically have to be using some sort of ranged weapon in this game, whether that be like just for ad clear or PvP, because fighter has a very hard time like clearing things from distance. Like they have a very annoying time with rangers and stuff or multiple enemies, so you can clear things from far away. Also, without a crossbow, you really can't cover distance on rangers or wizards unless they're kind of trolling, and you provide a very significant threat to them, specifically to wizards. Wizards are very, very afraid of crossbows. All right, with that being said, I do think that sums up the fighter guide. Feel free to ask any questions. If you would like, in the comments, I will happily talk about them with you. I always try to respond to every comment, or at the very least, I will like them. I promise I see every comment you guys leave, every single one. And if you, like I said, I really do reply to most. I reply like 90% of the comments, and the others are ones that I feel like that I don't need to reply to, but there's no like you're not expecting a reply, or you're not asking me a question to get a reply. Like so, I'll generally just like those and go on. But if you like this video, feel free to subscribe and like. I will be doing more, not necessarily just like this, but I do plenty of informational fighter guides and fighter stuff. And I will be uploading a Slayer fighter video either tomorrow or the day after. I'm not sure. So that should be very interesting. I got a pretty good gear set for Slayer, and I decided to run around with it and see how it felt. Spoiler alert, it was pretty good. But anyways, until next time, boys. Peace.